Let's talk about a really important topic in computer science, scoping. So scoping talks about when you can access variables and other constructs of the language, functions, pointers. So I've got some code here, a couple assignment statements with nice if-else, and then we're printing our variable out at the end. So we assign x and y to values, and then we have a conditional based off of x and y. And if that's true, we're going to go ahead and create this integer z. If it's not true, we're going to set z equal to 2 versus setting it to 1 in the earlier if. And then we're going to go ahead and print it out. Now, if I try to compile this code, what do you think will happen? Well, let's go ahead and just try it out. We get errors. It says in line 13, warning unused variable z. Well, why is it saying that? We're using it. We're using it in the else and we're using it in our print. Now, if we look at our later errors, line 17 and 19 is saying we're using an undeclared identifier z. But why does it think this? We have declared z. It's right up here. Well, the problem is scoping. Now, like I mentioned before, scoping are the rules that tell us when we can access things. In the case of the variable z, how we have it declared in the code right now, the only place you can access z is within these curly brackets. So with our control flow, we've started to get into lots of curly brackets. Pretty much what curly brackets are telling you is where your scope is. What can you access? Within here, within our curly brackets in our if, we can access anything that is declared within there and anything that is declared in the parent scopes above it. And the parent scopes above it are, in this case, there's two outside of it. There's the scope of our main function, and we'll talk more about functions later. And then there is something in C++ called the global scope, which you would define things kind of up here at the global scope. Typically, it's not a great idea to declare things at the global scope, so I'm not really even going to talk about it. We kind of want to ignore it as much as we can. So if we wanted to fix this, what we would have to do is declare z in our main scope. So we could say z is equal to, just set it equal to something else equal to 0. And then we can get rid of the declaration within the if statement because we've already declared it in our main scope. So we compile that. This time it compiles without errors, and we can go ahead and run it. And z equals 2 because our first if statement does not hold true. Now, what happens if I actually did declare int z in there? Would this compile? The answer is going to be yes, but you're going to get a warning. And you're going to get a warning that says unused variable z. Well, what's going on? Well, the way scoping rules work is that the scope you're currently in takes precedent, and the closer the scope is to you, those are going to take precedent. So when I create int z in here, I'm actually clobbering this int z up here. So anytime I use z from now on, here, it's actually referencing this z and not this one. So what is the moral of the story here? That's kind of confusing. try really hard not to name your variables. If you've got variables in different scopes, don't name them the same thing. You're going to get confused and not realize that you're using one location in memory when it's really another. So when you're naming variables, try to keep them all different. So just to illustrate what I was mentioning about the brackets, the curly brackets really defining scope. This might look a little odd, but you can actually, this is actually totally valid syntax to just have brackets floating in the middle of your code. And in here I can declare an int q, set that equal to 3. That's got something else set to 3. Let's go to 10. And now if I try to access q here, let's say z is now going to equal the value of q, what do you think is going to happen? Well, let's try it out again. Well, we get a warning saying unused variable q, which is here, and we get an error saying use of undeclared identifier q in line 15. That's because there is no q in the main scope. There is only a q in this ad hoc scope that I created in the middle of main. This line 15 can't see the q in here, therefore it thinks it's an undeclared variable. And this q in here is being called an unused variable because it's not being used anywhere within its own scope, anywhere that it can be seen. So scoping is a really super important concept, something you got to keep in mind at all times. You might run into a lot of compiler issues or compiler errors that you're not expecting because the scoping is not working how you're expecting it to. So keep in mind that if you're declaring stuff within curly brackets, you're not going to be able to see it outside of the range of those curly braces. That's kind of a very flip way of giving you the rules of scope. But just keep that in mind when you're programming and have fun out there.